Where we are today in society is being defined by many people and events in our world's history. From continental exploration, inventions, wars, movements, our world has changed drastically from where we started here as the human race. Events and even people have created systematic change using their courage and influence throughout history. And in recent times, since the 20th century, artists and celebrities have been able to use their influence on the public to drive change in the system. Artists who ignore the status quo, artists who challenged the rules, and artists who tested the boundaries. Artists like Sammy Davis, Sidney Poitier, and John Legend. Sammy Davis Jr. was born in Harlem in 1925. He suffered from the pains of racial segregation from an early age, growing up in one of the poorest neighborhoods in New York of the time. In his early years, Davis learned to dance from his father. Throughout his career, he amazed critics, fans, and fellow entertainers with his ability to sing, dance, and play numerous instruments.
Oink oink, a boogly boogly piggy, oink oink, a piggly piggly, oink oink, oink oink, a boogly boogly piggly piggly, oink oink.
In his autobiography, Yes I Can, Davis wrote of stark contrasts between how he was warmly greeted in showrooms while he faced segregation in the hotels where he played. Las Vegas strip hotels did not allow African American customers and entertainers of the post-war era to reside in or patronize the hotel casinos. Black performers entered and exited through the kitchens, and sometimes were lucky enough to get a meal in the places where they performed. They stayed in boarding houses or motels in racially segregated West Las Vegas. In the early 1960s, he joined Sinatra, Dean Martin, Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop to create the group known as Rat Pack.
They heard the breeze through the trees, singing weird melodies.
They would go on to perform at the famed Summit at the Sands shows. Davis was initially denied residence at the Sands Hotel until him and Sinatra threatened to pull the plug on Rat Pack shows. Hotels and casinos accepted his demands, giving Davis a suite in the hotel as well as opening the door for other black performers who had been forced, post-show, to find accommodations in other hotels and motels. Sidney Poitier was born prematurely in 1927 in Miami to a tomato farmer from Cat Island in the Bahamas. Growing up in the Bahamas, he saw black people working all sorts of jobs. He saw that black people were just as capable as white people. This had a major influence on him in his later years. At the age of 15, he moved to Miami to live with an older brother, and at age 17, he moved to New York. After a few years in the army during World War II, he took a series of menial dishwashing jobs before deciding to go into theater. Poitier's Hollywood film debut, No Way Out, from 1950, saw him in the role of a young doctor, already breaking racial stereotypes. Poitier said that the difference between life on Cat Island and in the southern United States was very difficult for him to overcome. His poor life in the Bahamas, he said, "I always had great pride. My parents taught me I was as good as anyone. In the Caribbean, a young Negro is never robbed of his pride." Film roles for African Americans in Hollywood had always been very limited. A number of black performers had gained prestige, however their roles did not necessarily reflect either the realities of African American life or the potentials of African Americans as actors. The few African American actors who were able to achieve any level of notability often did so by actually perpetuating white audiences' perception of African Americans. Poitier's upright portrayals of honest African American manhood were a far cry from the subservient roles of previous decades. He was also able to prove to the American movie-going public not only that African American men could act, but they could also think and feel with as much dignity as any white man. He also paved the way for future generations of African American actors by revising stereotypes and allowing for alternated portrayals of African American life. Sidney Poitier was very closely associated with the civil rights movement. Poitier's first wife made their Pleasantville Estate, a meeting place for civil rights leaders, becoming hostess to such personalities as Ruby Dee, Clarence Jones, Ossie Davis, John Oliver Kins, and Malcolm X. In 1964, Harry Belafonte convinced the hesitant Poitier to travel with him to the South for Freedom Summer to help boost the morale of the volunteers. The trip solidified Poitier's commitment to the SNCC, and he would become the symbol of the group's goals for African Americans. His wife found a 5-foot burning cross in their driveway after Poitier had marched in honor of James Meredith, who had been shot in 1966. When a hesitant Sammy Davis Jr. joined Poitier in the march at Tangaloo College, he said Harry and Sidney were like two black knights who made him feel safer in the Deep South. The 2014 film Selma is a historical drama directed by Ava DuVernay and written by Paul Webb. It's based on the 1965 Selma and Montgomery voting rights marches led by James Bell Hosta Williams, Martin Luther King Jr., and John Lewis. This movie won 4 Golden Globe Award nominations, including Best Motion Picture, Drama, Best Director, and Best Actor, and won for the Best Original Song. The Best Original Song being our focus point today. This song, Glory, written by John Legend and Common, was created for the film Selma. It refers to the civil rights era and current events regarding racial issues and police brutality. The lyrics of the song carry impactful references. Here are a few of the most important lines. The song is impactful because it connects past historical events with recent events of the same topics. Resistance in us, that's why Rosa sat on the bus. That's why we walked through Ferguson with our hands up. It's connected to the actions and impacts of Rosa Parks in the beginning of the Montgomery bus boycott with the 2014 shooting of unarmed Michael Brown Jr. And here again, now the war is not over, victory isn't won, and we'll fight on to the finish. Then when it's all done, we'll cry glory, oh glory, we'll cry glory, oh glory. These lyrics talk about overcoming oppression and attaining peace for black people. He said the war isn't over, and that it's come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. Saw the face of Jim Crow under a bald eagle. The biggest weapon is to stay peaceful. We sing, our music is the cuts that we bleed through. These 3 lines explain how the Jim Crow laws prosecuted black Americans, and how MLK led the civil rights movement using nonviolent protests. The reference to them singing about the freedom songs such as We Shall Overcome, Ain't Nobody Gonna Turn Me Around, and Change Is Gonna Come. All these songs were sung at protests to rally together the people and give them strength and hope. Another line of the song goes as follows. Justice for all isn't an... Another line from the song goes as follows. Justice for all just ain't specific enough. Speaking to how before civil rights movement, the government said every citizen had justice, and that race were separate but equal. Artists in their art had many influences and impacts on the civil rights movement, both in the past and present. They ratified stereotypes and pushed aside the status quo, inspiring and bringing together people who needed change.